Great. Thanks, Raeann. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day to join us. It's such an important topic for us all to commit a couple of hours and conversation and have a chance to ask some questions to our panelists today. The topic is Power of Attorney 101. The key information everyone needs to know about mental capacity and power of attorney. And I'll introduce myself. My name is Catherine Pink. I'm the chair of our Elder Abuse Prevention Network here in Peterborough. So thank you for joining us today. I'll start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with the original peoples of this land, one that is based on honor and deep respect. I'll just touch base on a couple of housekeeping items. All of everyone other than the panelists are muted. If you have a question, we welcome you to add that in the chat box. We will allow for time for questions and answers at the end. If the ASL interpreters have been able to join us, that's great. If people need to adjust the size of the image on the screen, we encourage you to drag the line between the video frame and the slides to the left. The speakers will be visible throughout the presentation. And just another point in regards to any questions you may have, we encourage you to keep them general in nature and not get into specifics or anything personal. But again, we're here to help, and there will be resources and contact information available to you at the end of the presentation. So at the end of the session, there will be a pop-up screen, and we'll be asking you to complete a brief survey. This is really helpful for us in terms of planning for future seminars. So just quickly, I'll just go over what we have planned for you in the next hour and a half. Laura Tamblyn Watts will start the presentation, followed by Jennie Fitzsimmons from Peterborough Police Services. And then we hope to have time for a bit of a panel discussion and, as I said, respond to some of the questions. So it's my pleasure to introduce Laura Tamblyn Watts, CEO of CanAge. Laura Tamblyn Watts is the founder and CEO of CanAge, Canada's National Seniors Advocacy organization. Laura is a passionate advocate on a variety of urgent issues affecting older Canadians, including long-term care, home care, financial security, elder abuse, healthcare, ageism, and inclusion of marginalized communities. Laura previously served as Chief Public Policy Officer at the Canadian Association of Retired Persons before establishing CanAge right at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, CanAge has emerged as the go-to media commentator and trusted voice for Canadian seniors, underscored by Laura's more than 20 years experience defending the rights and dignity of older adults as a lawyer and a thought leader. Also joining us is Raeann Rideout, Director of Provincial Partnerships and Outreach for Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. Raeann has for the past 17 years been actively engaged with community stakeholders and service providers in her role as the Central East Regional Coordinator, and she is now the Director of Partnerships and Outreach with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario. She takes the lead in the engagement of building collaborative partnerships, whether locally or nationally, with her 23 years of experience working in the field of elder abuse. Raeann has been an instructor for the Foundations of Elder Abuse and Prevention course at Trent University and has co-authored and published various research articles on the complexities of elder abuse. Also joining us today from the Peterborough Police Services is Detective Constable Jennie Fitzsimmons. She is the coordinator for domestic violence, elder abuse, and vulnerable persons investigations. And she's been in that role for 8 years. So it's my pleasure now to turn over the mic and all of you over into the wonderful hands of Laura Tamblyn Watts. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and it's so great to be here. Really love to have you introduce yourself in the chat. It also gives me a sense of kind of the jobs that you're doing. We've got caregivers, we've got police officers, people with lived experience, folks in financial crimes, all kinds of people who are thinking about these issues from a wide variety of perspectives. Really happy to have you here as well. Great, and a special welcome also to our friends outside of Ontario. I kind of spend my time in 3 different jurisdictions, BC, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. I'm in Nova Scotia right now, and I'll be heading back to Ontario on the 14th, assuming everything allows us to do that these days. So I have a good understanding of how things are different in different jurisdictions, and some of the things we're going to talk about in terms of substitute decision making and so on have different names in some of those jurisdictions. So really helpful to have you tell me if you're outside of Ontario. I'll make sure to use some of those languaging that's appropriate for your jurisdiction. So for instance, in British Columbia, we would be talking about representation agreements, and the Yukon as well. In Nova Scotia, we might talk about healthcare directives, but it's all kind of the same stuff. So we're going to talk a bunch today about some of the biggest issues that are going around. We're going to be talking about mental capacity issues. We're going to be talking about powers of attorney. And by that, I'm going to be sharing my information about what I mean about powers of attorney and what we don't mean about powers of attorney. And also going to talk about some red flags thinking about this. Now, I'm really excited to hear about your experiences, your thoughts. I'm a pretty good multitasker, so I have the chat right open in front of me. Happy to have you pop in all kinds of thoughts and questions. Share your experiences, put them in the chat if you like. We're going to be doing, as part of this, also a bit of a panel discussion and a bit of more formalized chats as well, but I am keeping my eye right now on the chat function. If there's got questions, I will answer them and fold them right in. So do feel free to be active on the chat, share resources. So if you, for instance, are an organization and you want to share your resources, put that in the chat so everyone can have the benefit of it. If you've got a personal experience you want to share, really happy to hear some of those personal experiences in the chat as well. So it's going to be really clear. We're going to kind of talk about what, so what, and now what. We're going to be talking about capacity issues. What do we mean by mental capacity? What it is, what it isn't, how do you check? We're going to talk a little bit about, what are powers of attorney? What's the role of an attorney? Did you sign up to do this thing? And what is it that you need to know if you're making it? We're going to talk a little bit about some red flags and how to do them. I've got some extra slides as well that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, just I have as part of the package, so you have access to all of this great material. It's also being recorded, so if anyone wants to make sure that they're sharing this information, it's going to be posted on our various websites, and you'll make sure to get an email also. So if there's any questions about making sure that you're getting all of the resources, the answer will be yes. 2 quick seconds about who CanAge is. We're a not-for-profit, nonpartisan organization. We work across the whole country, but our head offices are at U of T. We're not trying to sell anyone anything. We're not trying to get you to buy insurance. We're really here to try to elevate the conversations, to make sure that we're working in real partnership with folks in the area. And I'm going to just share a couple of experiences of some new best friends and a little bit of kind of what these things look like. So, you'll have heard all kinds of issues here about people who have a new best friend. In this case, we've got Mrs. Bernstein. She's 86, and she is got a power of attorney that has been drawn up for property decisions. We'll talk about that in a moment. And she's got her new best friend, Brenda. And Brenda's out there trying to use this power of attorney document And the people on the other end, in this case, it's an investment advisor, is worried because they have not heard from Mrs. Bernstein and they don't know what kind of reason is behind this power of attorney. They've never met Brenda before. They're trying to figure out whether or not there's financial abuse. And we're also getting frustrated. Brenda's getting frustrated because she can't use the power of attorney document for property the way that she wants to. And at the same time, the financial institution is really worried. Here's another one. This is a case of, a husband and wife. The husband wants really nothing to do with this circumstance, but the wife, Patricia, lives in a rural community. She's got some dementia. Her son, who is the unsuccessful son in the basement, has, really got no problem. He's over his mental health and addictions issues, so he says, and he is, decided that he's got a new enterprise that he wants to start, a new business that he wants to start. And so he ends up taking his mom to the financial advisor, and the financial advisor is trying to get instructions. She's telling the mom, who's 79, and she doesn't know about the diagnosis of dementia, that this is a really bad idea, that you should not be putting your own financial security at risk. But she really wants to do so. And she's trying to figure out if mom's got mental capacity to make these decisions. She doesn't know. She's trying to figure it out. And then at this point, mom just keeps saying things like, oh, he's such a good boy. And, of course, I love my son. And she's not sure what is going on here. So again, the financial advisor is trying to do the right thing. Here's one more. I call it the toothy charmer son. So this is a case of a woman who has mental capacity, no problem about that. She's excited to be able to manage her finances online. It's hard for her to get places, and the financial institution here has met the son, Vincenzo. He's got a nice suit on. He's got the big teeth. He's very smiley, and so on and so forth. But what starts happening is that there's some strange financial activity going on in the account. And so the financial advisor decides that he's going to reach out to the son because he kind of can't get a good understanding from the mom. And in doing so, he thinks he's doing the right thing. But what happens is the next day, mom comes in, and she is, foggy, but she's also angry. And so we're trying to figure out, does she have mental capacity problems? Is she being abused? What's going on? But what we do know is she's limping and she's looking upset. So let's start talking first about mental capacity issues. What do we mean by that? We use the term a lot, but we don't always know what we're really talking about. We have this idea. The first thing that I often talk about when people say, I think mom's, getting pretty foggy or may have dementia and so on, is I say, does she have a UTI? Does she have a urinary tract infection? And then people look at me like I may have a mental capacity issue, because why am I talking to them about a urinary tract infection? But what we know is that many older people are really very affected by things like urinary tract infections, kidney infections, and so on. And it's not dementia. It's you've got some type of impact to your mental capacity. And, you don't need a diagnosis here. What you need is some sulfa drugs and some cranberry juice, the real cranberry juice, not the good tasting stuff, the bad tasting stuff. And then what we can see is sometimes people with urinary tract infections improve their well-being considerably. I also ask often if this is a person who's had surgery recently. Many people don't know that, particularly if you're a person over about 70 and you have any kind of surgery, doesn't matter what kind it is, you may have what we call post-surgical delirium. And that can be usually a couple of days, or it could be up to 6 months. So my mom had a hip replacement. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had a hip replacement in the family. And the first day she was doing great, fantastic. I thought, this is really good. And she was in her 70s at the time. The second day I showed up, she was talking about all the birds flying around her room. And I thought maybe there is a bird flying around the room, but no, in her mind, there were birds everywhere in the room. Did she have mental capacity at that time? Well, it depends for what. She certainly was having a completely different experience than I was. It got better. A couple of days later, we know that, she would improve, and she did improve, and she was fine. Talk about mental capacity, we can talk about all kinds of different things that can have on mental capacity issues. So for instance, you can have good old drugs and alcohol, right? You could have medications that affect it. Lots and lots of us have had meds that made us zooey. There's no question about it. You can have a migraine affect your mental capacity. You can be in a car accident. You could have trauma, post-traumatic stress, mental health issues. So when we think about mental capacity issues, let's not always be thinking about dementia, although certainly that's a real thing. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by mental capacity, what the legal test is. And it's like so many other things in law, hard to say, hard to do. Okay, so the idea here is that you need to be able to understand information and appreciate the consequences. You think to yourself, like, what does that mean? Let me tell you the story about a colleague of mine who I knew who had a lifelong challenge with schizophrenia. He was diagnosed quite young, about 18 years old. He'd been under medication supports for schizophrenia for, at this point, more than 20 years. He understood chapter and verse about schizophrenia. So if you asked him about it, he could tell you everything you needed to know. You asked him about his schizophrenia, he'd say, I'm not schizophrenic. He understood schizophrenia, but he didn't appreciate that it had to do with him. Would he be able to make decisions about his schizophrenia? Probably not. Let's go to the other end. So my grandmother, when she was about 93, had really significant dementia at this point, but she could still express issues. And when the nurse would come to her to provide her with her medication for her blood sugars, so she took insulin, she would have the nurse come to her and she would see this thing in her hand and she would do this. She'd put her hands up and shrink back away from the nurse. She appreciated that she was going to get a poke. She got that. She understood that there was going to be a needle coming to her and that was going to poke. So she appreciated that that was going to happen. But she did not understand that this was just another insulin injection for her and that she needed it for her blood sugar. So she appreciated but didn't understand. You got to do both. You can understand and appreciate about some things and not others. So for instance, you may have a brain injury and you may be able to do your routine finance, right? You can go out, you can take your debit card, you can spend your regular money. But because of the brain injury, you may have impulse control challenges and you may not be able to understand some of the complexity of higher finance, and you may have other challenges around executive function. So you can do some things, but not others. When I'm talking about mental capacity, I really try to make sure that people understand that just because you're old doesn't mean you're incapable. That sounds really obvious, but we know perfectly well that age-related discrimination is such a huge piece. So I talk about mental capacity as a fluctuating continuum. I had 3 kids in about 4.5 years, and I joke often that I don't think I was mentally capable of making a lot of decisions, before 10 in the morning for about 4 years straight. What I'm trying to say there is that you can be better at some times of day than others. And for folks who have experience with things like sundowning, which is a state of greater agitation, if you have dementia, that can happen later in the day. It's good to find out whether people have good times of the day or not. That can be true as well for things like blood sugar. So my husband's diabetic. It's hard for him to understand and appreciate things in the way that he would want to. He's less capable when his blood sugars are really high or really low. When they're back in there, in the middle ground, it's no problem. So let's not think about this thing as something that's static, like a light switch. Let's think of it as kind of turning up and down the heat. These things fluctuate. Love to hear in the chat if you've got some experience. Amanda was sharing one of her experiences about, a person who had post-surgical delirium as well. If you've ever had other experiences with people who may have either malnutrition or lack of fluids, they may be off their meds or taking the wrong combination of meds. All of these things can affect it. What you're trying to understand is where you are in that continuum, and is it going to be a downward spiral? Dementia is going to be, or is it something that you can help to stabilize? When we're talking about these issues, when we're talking about capacity, in this case, it's not just a nice to know thing. We actually have to know because people need to make decisions. And so we're going to talk about different kinds of decisions. And, this is a way that I explain it to folks. It's a really clear and easy way. I think about like two sides of pieces of paper or two hands, whichever it is you like. And I say there's two areas of stuff we need to talk about, right? One is all about the decisions about you and your body and where your body lives and what your body eats and so on. And those are what we call in Ontario personal care decisions. Again, in BC, you might call those a representation agreement decisions. In other jurisdictions, a healthcare directive types or personal care directive decisions. I'll use the Ontario language, but it can have different language. It still mostly means the same stuff. It's about your health care, but it's also where you live. It's how you dress, what you eat, what decisions you get to be made, all of that stuff about you as you. The other side of it is about things. It's about your money. It's about your real estate, any kind of investments you may have, but it's also your stuff. It's also your jewelry. It's your hairbrush. It's your sofa. It's your debts. It's your Visa bill. It's all of these kinds of things together. So I tell people, look, these are the two areas we're going to be talking about. And when we're thinking about these two areas, we are always trying to make sure that you have the most ability to make decisions. And that means you got to help people be their most capable. It also means there is the constant assumption that the person is capable. Okay. You got to always assume with people who you meet that they have capacity. So capacity exists unless it's taken away. You don't want to be taking away things. If you take away a person's capacity, now we're in Britney Spears category, right? You take away the right for reproduction. You take away the right to have sex because, of course, sex without consent is sexual assault. You take away the right for them to determine what they eat, what medications and treatments they have, where they live, how they are in the world. I mean, these are fundamental issues. So you only ever try to do what we call the most effective, least intrusive, take away just that little bit. So my mom, who was seeing, birds in the room, didn't affect her ability to make some decisions, but it did make her decision, certainly a red flag for me. She was really confused about some things, but was also totally not confused about others. We talk a little bit about things where people have memory loss on a short-term basis. Consistent choice. So if I am trying to figure out, what it is I want, and I can't remember, but I keep saying the same thing, it's pretty good. So if I said, for instance, let's see, I was going to make a power of attorney document. And if I'm asked about that by, say, a healthcare provider says, Laura, if you're ever in a car accident or couldn't make a decision or has dementia or your health condition progressed, who would you want to be able to make decisions for you? Let's start that conversation. And I say, oh, well, I've never really thought about it, but I would like my friend Raeann to be the decision maker. They say, great. They come in the next day, say, Laura, let's talk about who you might want to have make decisions for you. And I say, oh, I've never thought about it. But I think I'd like my friend Raeann. Well, we talked about it just yesterday. I just couldn't remember that. Next day shows up. Another healthcare provider comes in and says, Laura, I think we should talk about advanced care planning. I think we should talk about, who you might like to be your decision maker if you can't make the decision. I say, I never really thought about it, but I think I'd like my friend Raeann. Okay, so I have forgotten because of short-term memory loss, but each and every time I have a consistent choice. You just have to be able to make a choice in time, have the ability to understand and appreciate in time. Think about it this way. Think about it if you're sleeping, right? You're asleep. You can't make decisions because you're asleep. You wake up, you say, oh, I need to take my medication. You take your medication and you go back to sleep. That period of time is the only period that you need to make the decision. I don't need to be awake all of the time. It's kind of the same when we think about mental capacity. You don't need to always have the ability to make certain decisions. Okay, so 2 domains, personal care and property. People will be, no matter how often you say it, confused about dead. So what I'm talking about is when you're alive and capable, alive and have some capacity challenges. Power of attorney documents, we're going to talk about when they're active, but they all die with the person. Okay, so if you're talking about power of attorney documents, if you're alive, they can be alive. If you're dead, they die with you. And that's when the will, testamentary issues, takes over. Now, I could pick my husband to be my decision maker for personal care, my husband to be my decision maker for property, and my husband to be my executor of my estate for my will. But he's wearing 3 different hats at 3 different times. Let's learn a bit more about this. This is really basic stuff, but I want us to make it really clean and easy. All right, you're walking across Main Street. You're mentally capable one side of the street. If decisions come up, you get to decide. Cross the street, you get hit by a bus, whang, you're completely in a coma. Now you're mentally incapable. They scrape you off the ground. They take you to the hospital. After the emergency stuff is sorted out, they've got to figure out who is going to make the decision. Let's talk about that now. I don't want you to get too attached to this one. I'm only putting it in because it exists still somewhere on the books. I haven't seen one in probably 15 years. This is called a general power of attorney. This is not what you mostly care about. Again, I'm just telling you about it so you know. So way back in the day in Niagara, where I'm from originally, my grandmother, before her dementia, had some hip problems. Hard for her to get across the street, get her groceries at the Dominion grocery store. Can you believe me? I'm dating myself here. I used to take her checkbook, dating myself again, and buy her groceries. I'd go across the street. I'd show up at the cash, the nice person to the cash. I would write a check. When was the last time we did that? I would hand over the check. I would get the groceries and go to see my grandmother and unload. My grandmother would look at it all very carefully because she watched every penny. She asked me, why did I buy those eggs? Were those more expensive? And so on and so forth. It's because we didn't have Apple Pay or Interact. I couldn't Venmo something. I couldn't email you money. And credit cards mostly didn't exist until the later 80s. So this was a document that let you do that. It ended upon mental incapacity. Do not get too interested in this. I swear you will probably never see one, but it does exist. It could be kicking around. I just want to let you know. Pay attention to this one, this and the next one. These are the ones you care about. In Ontario, what's called a continuing power of attorney. In other jurisdictions, it could be called an enduring power of attorney. The Americans often like calling it a durable power of attorney. I guess they use better paper. I don't know. And what's important about it is it's active right away. And this is for your property decisions. Okay. This is for your property decisions. So here's an example. I did not want to wait in line for 3 hours to renew my parking pass at the city. My husband was going, and I said, hey, take my documents too. Here's my license. Here's the receipt. Take my documents, go down. And after you do your parking pass renewal, mentally slip off your shoes and mentally put on my shoes, hand them over my driver's license, my parking renewal, and every other thing that they need. Be me and renew it for me. And he's like, that's not gonna work. No one's gonna do that. Like, no way. So yeah. This is your continuing power of attorney for property. I've appointed you to be my substitute decision maker. Okay. So I am letting you be my substitute decision maker. We're capable. It's active right away, unlike the other ones I just showed you. It's like, well, okay, I'll try, but there's no way that's going to work. Like, they're not going to do that. I get a phone call. It worked. I can't believe it. I said, yes, of course it worked, because you were metaphorically being me. You have my documents and you have this continuing power of attorney for property, which lets you be me financially. He's like, but isn't that incredibly dangerous? Oh, yeah, it can be. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. In this case, it was really handy and I saved myself 3 hours. If I was across Main Street, I got hit by my bus, nothing happens that's different. He's still able to renew my parking pass, whether I'm in a coma or just too lazy to go and do it myself. So the advantages of a continuing power of attorney for property, again, also called an enduring power of attorney for property in other jurisdictions, is it's active right away. And I get to watch over it just the way my grandmother did with the receipt for the eggs and everything else at the grocery store. If I don't like it, I can override it. But if something happens, there's no have to do anything. It's already active. So it's easier, but the challenge is there's vulnerability when you're a capable person, if you've got someone else mucking around in your business for your financials. Now, if you are still mentally capable, you can always say, and undo it. But there is that risk, because if someone acts badly, takes all your money and runs away, then you're going to be in a much more difficult situation. They're not supposed to do that, of course, but we're going to talk about some of those risks. Okay, so active right away, he can renew my parking pass. If I get hit by the bus and I'm in a coma, he can still renew the parking pass. Nothing new has to happen. Let's look at the other one that matters. We call these a springing power of attorney. It will not probably say springing power of attorney on the top. You have to read the document. And again, this is for property decisions. It sleeps. So it's like that credit card that you have, that you get in the mail, and it's got that number on the back. And you can't use this credit card until you call and activate it. I have it, but it's not usable. It's not effective. I've got to spring it into effect. I've got to do something. It was created, but it's asleep. So he cannot renew my parking pass. But I get hit by that bus and I'm in a coma, he can. The tricky point is this. How do you actually trigger that? Well, yeah, that's not so easy sometimes. So we're thinking about this. We're asking ourselves, great. Okay, it's safer because no one can muck around. We've got designated mental capacity assessors that you can hire through the Mental Capacity Assessment Office. It's private pay. Cost anywhere from $500 to $1,500 typically. Don't quote me on that. People get to set their own prices. And if you need to have a very specialized one, like a psychiatric assessment by a geriatrician or a geri-psychiatrist, and it's not part of the healthcare, it's part of something else, you could be paying thousands of dollars for that. Sometimes you can have it in there. It's upon the determination of your doctor and your partner. So you could have anything in there. It could be upon the determination of your best friend and a medical professional. Most people have upon some type of capacity assessment. But let's talk about capacity assessments. So we know they're private pay, mostly, unless it's part of a medical treatment process. And would you submit yourself to a capacity assessment if you knew that you had to pay for it? If you didn't do well, they're going to remove your rights. You're going to have to give over that authority to somebody else. It's a hard sell. Now, the person only has to assent, not consent. The reason is this. We're trying to figure out whether they can consent to begin with. So assent is less than that. It means kinda that they're willing to go along with it. They're not suing this. They're not saying no. They're not getting up and leaving. Capacity assessor has to start off by advising them of their rights advice. They have to say who they are, what they're doing, what could happen, what they're determining, and get agreement, again, assent. But at any point in that process, if they stop it, it's done. Then we have to try to figure out how to get a capacity assessment. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Okay, I'm just going to review here. Continuing power of attorney is active right away. He can go get my parking pass. I get into a car accident, I'm unconscious, he can still get my parking pass. Nothing new has to happen. But there's this risk that if he does the wrong thing, then he has access to my finances. Springing power of attorney is asleep, but upon something, it will spring into effect. And that springing thing can be sometimes a bit challenging. So safer in the sense that nobody can muck around with your financial business, but then that springing piece can be hard. Do not pick, I want Dr. Bruce Lee to be the person who decides, because Dr. Bruce Lee may not actually be practicing or alive anymore. So you're going to have to go with more general terms. This is not important to this conversation, but again, in the way that I started with the general one, I'm finishing with the limited one. You've done this before. If you needed, for instance, to pick up your passport, but you couldn't go and pick it up yourself, you turn the paper over and you put something like, I'm going to have my best friend pick it up, and this is this person's name, and I give them authority. Or I'm going away to Florida for 3 months, and this person has the authority to manage my affairs while I'm gone. It's a limited amount of time, and it doesn't help you if you're incapable, but it does exist. So I started by saying that I spend time in 3 different provinces. I have power of attorney documents in each province. Could I just use my Ontario ones? Yes, but the problem is it's going to be hard. And I may need to go to court to get it recognized. It's going to be a whole thing. It's actually just easier to have documents in each jurisdiction. So it's possible. And the laws are a bit different in every jurisdiction too. So if you have someone who's got a couple different places that they live, particularly true if they've got a place maybe in the States and in Canada, they're going to get 2 different versions of it. So when we're talking about what the job is, I've given the job to my husband to be these decision makers. He's got to do a bunch of stuff in a bunch of different ways. So he can't be reckless. He can't secretly make money from me. If I revoke the power of attorney when I'm still mentally capable, and I'm going to show you what that looks like here. Okay. If I'm still mentally capable, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want you doing this job anymore. I'm revoking it. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. He's got to stop. He can't go around pretending that he still has authority. He does not. And he can't touch my will. Okay. So even if he's the executor of the estate or something, he doesn't matter. If I'm alive, it's powers of attorney. And he can't rewrite my will for me. He can't delegate his job to someone else. So if I pick him to be my attorney, my decision maker, he's like, yeah, I don't feel like it. I'm going to get my accountant and they're going to do it. Nope. He can hire an accountant to give him advice. That's fine. But he can't actually offload the duty to somebody else. So, and this is one of the ones we saw in the chat here as well as in one of the Q&A. Like, what happens if you don't have a power of attorney? So first of all, most people don't. Only about 2/3 of Canadians, true in Ontario, but true across the country, will ever have a power of attorney document. Only about 1/3. And so that means most of the time they won't. You need to know what happens. So this is around personal care decisions, okay? This is stuff around your body and your health and your living areas. So under our legislation for healthcare consent, if you need to be scraped off the road and have someone make a decision for you, there will always be somebody. This is kind of the list. The children and parents are actually equal, and it's important to know that they have to agree as a group. So what I mean by that is this. If you have 5 siblings, all 5 of them have to agree. If you have 10 children, all 10 of them have to agree. That may not be easy. All right, let's kind of go from the top. So for people who play cards, you'll know what a trump card is. I don't mean President Trump, I mean kind of the top. And so if you go to court and the court appoints someone to be your decision maker, then that's the top job. And we saw that again with Britney Spears and her, what looks like fairly horrible father. He was appointed by a court and he got to make the decisions until a court revokes that. They're rare, they're expensive. You mostly need a lot of evidence, you mostly need a lawyer. It's a difficult thing to go get. So then, assuming you don't have a guardian, and it's unlikely that you would, then you go to power of attorney. Again, only a third of people. I'm going to leave the consent capacity board for a minute, but I'm going to come back to it. Then it's the default of kind of the people you'd expect, right? If you've been adopted, you fall into the category. So if you've adopted as a child, then you are a child of the family. If you're adopted as a sibling, then you're a sibling of the family. Doesn't count in-laws though. Isn't that funny? So we know the daughters-in-law in particular are key caregivers, but they don't get a voice. Also, if I had a best friend, maybe I was estranged from my family. Maybe I have a family that I've built rather than I've been blood related to, which is often the experience in some cases of certain marginalized communities. Some of the LGBTQ+ communities in particular may have built families rather than biological families that they more identify with. And this list may not be what they want. So I invite you to take a moment and think about who would it be on the list. Then remember, they could be in the same car accident as you. So if I was driving with my children who are 18, 19, and 20, so they could be decision makers, and my husband, and we were all knocked unconscious, it's going to end up with my 85-year-old parents. If they can't make it, it's going to then go to one of my brother, who is a very nice person, but would certainly not want to be able to make that decision. So this isn't really for ongoing decisions. This is just for individual decisions. If you want to get the right person, this is where you make sure that you get a power of attorney document. Here's a big surprise. What if that same car accident happens, but you haven't made a power of attorney document, and assuredly you haven't gone and gotten a guardianship? It defaults to no one except the public guardian and trustee. And this is a big surprise to people. They really are very surprised about this because they kind of think, well, like my spouse should be able to make my financial decisions. Well, no. If you got the hydro bill in your name and your spouse has got the, the taxes is his name, you can't pay for each other's, you can't get access. If you're joint on absolutely everything, which is actually quite rare, then you can, because you are joint on it, you both have access to it, but mostly that's not the case. And so people find that really surprising. They think, well, of course my spouse could do that, or of course my adult child could do this. If you're going to only make one document, make the property power of attorney, because there is no default list. And what's going to happen is this: the public guardian trustee is going to go looking around, going to go try to find someone else to do it, because they don't know you, right? They don't know who you are. So they're going to try to find probably someone on this list, but who knows who they're going to end up with. Remember, default lists for personal care decisions, but really it's more around the healthcare stuff, and no default list for power of attorney for property. Not everyone can be an attorney. Here's the list of stuff. So you have to be 18 to be the attorney for property, of course, as the legal aid to be in a contract. For personal care, you only have to be 16. They have to themselves be mentally capable. That makes sense. But in the example where you've picked somebody, but they're also in the same car accident with you, that's a problem. The attorney for personal care can't be a few different kinds of folks. They can't be your healthcare provider, unless your husband or the wife or partner is a healthcare provider, but like they're not your healthcare provider. They can't be if there's more than one attorney appointed, then you have to figure out what that means. Okay. So let's just say this. Let's say I have chosen my 3 children. Wow. 18, 19, and 20. It is assumed, unless I say otherwise, that they all have to agree and they have to act together. And that is a problem because this is a time of stress, right? It means somebody's incapable. And my kids get on really, really well, except in a time of stress. I don't know that they would all just come to the same agreement. And so if you're going to just be quiet about it, if you're going to be silent about it, the default is they all have to agree. So if you pick, God, don't pick 8 people, but if you picked 8 people, they all have to agree. If you pick 2 people, they have to agree. And if you make it more clear, if you decide to change that, you can do what's called joint and several. What that means in plain language is first to the bank, first to the bed. So if my brother and I were attorneys, as we are for my parents, let's just say my mom needed a decision to be made. Either I could go to the bank, or either I could go to the hospital, or my brother could. It doesn't matter. We don't need both of us to do it. We don't need to both of us agree. So there's good and bad in that. You can imagine that trying to get everyone to agree can be really hard, but also having someone compete who has totally different opinions, right? That can be hard as well. Really important. Sherry's pointing out that she's working in a case right now that's got a restriction on her power of attorney for property that says that power of attorney will only come into effect when the doctor writes a letter confirming incapacity. It's really common. The doctor has advised that he does not assess capacity for property decisions and would not be comfortable providing a letter. That is, by the way, also very common. So they probably do have to either get another medical professional. In this case, Sherry, they could ask to be referred to somebody who is like a geriatric psychiatrist. So they may need a specialist referral. If they're also a doctor, they probably need a specialist. Otherwise, it will likely have to go to an assessor. Or they could try another doctor that feels comfortable. Many, many doctors do not feel comfortable making these assessments because they're not really trained in it. Okay, remember joint and several versus joint. So to decide what you want to do. It's also really important if you're going to be doing a power of attorney document that they understands what the exact duties are. And these are the duties. And again, you're going to actually have this information before you as well. So you've got to make sure that you're standing in the shoes of the person. You're making the decisions in the manner that they would want to do. If you are a property decision maker, then you have to continue on and do these things. If you're a decision maker for personal care, think about the values, wishes, and beliefs, what we call wishes in legislation, and you have to do what they would do. This can be hard for some people. So for instance, if you had somebody who you've chosen, let's just say I've chosen my friend Emma. I've made her up, and let's just make Emma a Jehovah's Witness. And she doesn't believe in blood transfusions. That's very personal to her, and let's just say that that's the case. But I want all kinds of things done. I would want blood transfusions. If I need it for surgery or I need it for some type of healthcare decision, Emma has to take her own shoes off, proverbially, and put on mine and be me and say, yes, Laura wants a blood transfusion. That may be really hard for her to do, particularly if it violates her own beliefs, but she's got to do what I would want to do. You may want to think that through and talk to people and make sure that they feel like they can do what you would want to do. Doesn't mean they've got to agree with it, but they would do it. And of course, end of life decisions is a big one as well. So we have to think about those things. You have to be able to make these decisions with respect to what the incapable person would want, but you also have this really important duty to consult and explain. So you don't just get this magical power. You actually have to still go to the allegedly incapable person Even if you think that's not going to work very well, you still have to go and say, hey, dad, who has dementia, I'm, we're thinking about, where you might want to live. And it's getting really hard to be here in this seniors village. You're going to need some more care. I want to talk to you about that. You may not think that your dad understands. You may not think that your dad is able to follow along, but you still have a duty to consult with them and try to get from them what they would want. You also have to make sure that you are consulting with people that are close to them. Again, ultimately, you're the decision maker, but you have to check in. So if there's a spouse or friends or whoever is close to their life, you've got a duty to consult. And you got to think about three things. You got to think, is it going to improve the quality of life of the person I'm making the decision for? Or is it going to prevent that quality of life from deteriorating? And we have to figure out, is this going to reduce the extent or the rate at which the quality of life will deteriorate? And whether the benefit outrisks the harm. So these are the particular roles of attorney for personal care. People often think that once you make a power of attorney document, you cannot take it back. That is not true. So vision again, that slide, active right away, point of incapability, and so on into the point. As long as you are still a mentally capable person, you can revoke it. Okay. And a lot of times people are saying, well, I'm stuck because this person is my power of attorney. You're like, yeah. The question is, do you still have the mental ability to revoke it? Let's put it this way. If you have the power to make one, you've got the power to revoke it. There's a couple of ways that you need to do that. You got to have two people witnessing, signing a statement saying that you're revoking it. They got to be with you when you sign. It's the same as kind of making the power of attorney, for that matter, a will. There's no really special form for it, but do make sure that there's a copy that's given to anybody, including the person who was the power of attorney document. So if my evil friend Barb has been doing bad things, I may have some capacity challenges, but I still have enough mental capacity to revoke a power of attorney. I do these things. I make sure that Barb has a copy, but I also make sure that my healthcare provider has copies, my banks, and so on. I don't have to by law, but it's really a smart idea, because how are they supposed to know? Don't assume that a person wants to do it. I found out, quite a surprise, when I was 39 years old, that my parents had appointed me as an attorney when I was 19. In Ontario, you don't have to ask or get agreement from the person you pick. So right now, of the about 100 people who are joining us today, I assure you, many of you are attorneys and have no idea. Over the holiday season, maybe you should ask, because it is a surprise. Great question from Riley in the chat. If you create a new power of attorney, is it necessary to revoke an old one? Okay. Is it necessary? No. Is it good practice? Yes. Let's make it crisp and clear, Riley. Okay. If you make a new power of attorney document, it automatically revokes the old one. Sometimes, however, they're not exactly the same. So think about, you got too much pastry for your pie plate, right? So sometimes you'll make a second power of attorney document that leaves some of the pastry uncut. And then you think, well, now you've got two documents and they don't quite perfectly fit over each other. But no, it's the most recent document. If you make a new document, it revokes the old one. But let's not be difficult about it. Get a revocation, because then everybody understands that you did mean to do it, that you had turned your mind to it. It's crisper, it's cleaner, it's not required, but it is better if you can. I hope that answers your question, Riley. So when you're thinking about things about whether you should pick someone to be your attorney, here's a few things that you should think about. Are they willing to do it? Are they going to be around? You can't have somebody who's got, fraud charges. Do they understand the job? Well, they probably don't, because they probably wouldn't do it if they really truly understood the job. Can you trust them? Are they a detail-oriented person? And I say that because it's pain to be an attorney. And what if you were in a car accident at 40 and really it ends up being 40 more years where someone's making decisions. Like, it's a long job. Really important as well to have a backup person or people. And of course, me being me, I have 2 sets of backup people. My husband's my first attorney, but he could be in the same car accident. After that, it's a friend of mine. After, what if they're traveling or they become incapable? I have another backup person. Now, that's a bit much, I confess, but a backup alternate is just as important. Is it better to appoint the same person or same people for both your power of attorney for personal care as it is for property? There's no real right answer for that. I have my husband as my power of attorney first for both, but different people as my backups. For personal care, I have a friend of mine who's a nurse. We've known each other for 40 years. For my property decision, I have a friend of mine who's a bookkeeper. Very, very, very correct, and will have no problem keeping those books. There's no right answer. And some people don't have anybody, right? Sometimes you'll have somebody, but it's not a great decision. It's the unsuccessful son in the basement, right? You only have that person. You can appoint what's called a monitor. So if you have maybe a next door neighbor who doesn't want to involve themselves completely, who doesn't want to be your decision maker completely, but is willing to keep an eye on the unsuccessful son in the basement, they have a right as a monitor to get access to accounts, to get access to medical records, to ask questions, and to have their questions answered. They become kind of an interested party. Jane's asking me, should spouses have the same power of attorney for property? Jane, it depends. You should certainly, if you share money and you share assets, and I don't presume that people do anymore, but probably, should they have the same one? Well, it's very common that they appoint each other as their first, as I have done. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying it's common. Okay. As a backup person, we don't have the same backup person. My husband has other businesses and other kinds of things. Peter, I think it's helpful, if you toss them into the chat, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A as well. And I noticed that you put some questions here as well. So why don't I turn to those questions here? Peter's asking, should a person create a will, a power of attorney for personal care, and a power of attorney together with a lawyer, or are there online solutions which cost a fraction, safe and sound, provided that things are normal and straightforward? Yeah, it depends. Okay, here's what you should not do. Don't go to the drugstore and buy a kit. They're almost always wrong. They're made in like Minnesota or Ohio or whatever. They swear that they're right. We call them estate litigation kits. If you can afford to go to a lawyer, they're often a loss leader. And by that, they mean they're not often considered really expensive. So you may get a bundle of 2 powers of attorney and a will for a couple $100. If you've got very confusing circumstances, it's going to cost more, not because the issue is more, but because it's harder and more complex and you're going to take out more time. If you have the chance to use a lawyer, please use a lawyer. If you do not, and I understand many people will not be able to do so, then there are some online kits that are good. Please make sure that they are right in your jurisdiction. Okay, so don't make sure that they're valid in your jurisdiction. Understand that those should only be used for very simple things. Okay, so if there's any kind of guardianship of kids or any of those types of things, I really, really recommend, if you could get legal advice, please, please, please do. As I say, the will kits and whatever are a mess, but there are some new online versions. For powers of attorney, in the jurisdictions that allow you to make them without a lawyer, which includes BC, which includes Ontario, which does not include Saskatchewan, for instance, the public guardian trustee and attorney general's office will have them online. So if you want to Google power of attorney Ontario, enter, you will probably find the public guardian trustees kit. It is legal. It is pretty basic, but it is legal. Here, you also asked, before the person can use power of attorney and have discussions, how is it invoked? Does someone have to certify? Now, that answer depends on whether or not you have that continuing power of attorney. Again, my husband could go get my parking pass. when I'm mentally capable, but just don't want to do it. Or if I've made it a springing power of attorney as well, that it does need to be triggered. So it does depend. Really does depend. I'm going to click back over to hear about how things can be used and misused. So powers of attorney are neither good or bad, right? It is better to have one, I say, because then at least you've appointed someone, you've picked someone, you've used your choice. It's not going to end up in the hands of the public guardian trustee, and then they're going to try to figure out someone to do it, and whatever else. And sometimes there are people who don't have great choices, right? Let's be clear. But at least if you've chosen somebody, you have an opportunity to get them used to what it is that you would want them to do. You can have powers of attorney be used and misused. I'm sure this is not a surprise to anybody. Joint accounts and powers of attorney are the two most common ways to financially abuse someone that you know. About 2/3 of all documents that are used are connected with family members and friends. If you want, you can actually have a trust company. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Most people don't know this. So if you use, I don't know, Scotia Trust or RBC Trust or any of those guys, right? They can only charge the same amount that your husband, wife, partner, neighbor, friend can charge. There's a certain percentage that they're allowed to charge. And they can't charge more. And they exist in perpetuity, hopefully. They will only be able to do this for property decisions. Okay, they can't do it for personal care decisions. Property decisions. I tell you, I think it's a great idea for many, many people because it gets rid of some of the problems of family dynamics. So you have 4 kids, you know, they're all going to fight. Or if you've got, you know, one power of attorney for property who's, you know, at war with the power of attorney for personal care, then you get into a mess, right? So some people would really, I think, benefit from exploring with their trust company. It's not more expensive, and more people are doing it. Pamela's asking me, is the document for power of attorney produced by, in this case, it's actually the Ministry of Attorney General, reliable? Yes, it's reliable. It's legal. It's very simplistic. Okay, so it's not complex. I don't use it, but when I teach classes, I get my students, I could say children, they feel like children, my students to fill them out because I want them to have the experience. They can rip them up afterwards. I want them to have the experience of thinking through things. So are they valid? Yes. Are they very simplistic? Yes. They may suit your needs. They may not suit your needs. Is it better to have one than not? Yes. We actually have a section of the criminal code, section 331, which we're going to talk about as soon as I'm wrapping up here in a minute, which is theft pursuant to a power of attorney. It can be a criminal charge. There's also all kinds of civil things for doing it wrong as well. Here's what you need to know. It's actually a big job to be an attorney for somebody else. You have to be very, very careful. CanAge has put together a course, and Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is a partner in that, called POA 101. And that will be online in the new year. And it's a free, massive, open online course. It's a free course that anyone can take. I know it's online. It's not perfect for that, but you can print things out too. There's videos, there's quick ways of doing it. There's 14 different modules that can teach you actually how to be an attorney and so on. Hey, Jane, great to hear from you. Jane points out that individuals setting up wills, okay, so this is when you're dead, okay, need not add set amounts if giving to children, but they can do percentages. Yes, that's quite common, okay? So when you're thinking about, you know, okay, when I'm dead, what do I need to think about? Often people will be able to do percentages and those types of things. Diane's asking me, are holograph wills valid in Ontario? Okay. A holograph will is a will that you've essentially kind of just written out yourself. It's maybe not signed correctly. It's not in the right format, whatever else. Are they valid in Ontario? They're going to go to court, Diane. They're not really very valid on their face of it, but they can be made valid, but it's going to end up in court. So anyone who thinks themselves are going to be saving themselves money by not having not having a lawyer do their power of attorney or their will, in this case for the will, you're going to end up in court on the other end. So really a good opportunity to, if you have a little bit of money, or even you can use a legal aid clinic that students put on sometimes, special times a year. It's great to do that if you can. As I say, there are some other ones as well. Lorna asked me, oh, I remember that one, that pen and ink changes powers of attorney or wills perfectly okay as long as you date and initial the changes. Yes, so she's asking about, is that a codicil? So can you update a document that you've already made, a power of attorney or a will? Can you update it without redoing the whole thing? Is it possible? Yes, you can do that. You can update it. You're going to have two people look at it. You have to amend it, but these days just do a new one, honestly. Like mostly you're just printing it out again. So codicils, changes to these documents, were done when we didn't have the internet and we didn't have word processing and we didn't have printers and so on, right? So my recommendation is don't just redo it, but if you have to change it, then you can do it in a very certain way. Okay, it's easy to do powers of attorney. I'm telling you all the easy ways to do it, but it can be hard to get out of. And if someone's making off with your money, they can literally bankrupt you as well. I mean, they're not supposed to do it, but they can. Don't think that you have a good understanding about what your person who you're appointing thinks, right? So, they may be thinking, well, mom is not using the money anyway. I could just help myself to it. Or, I'm going to inherit it. That's the biggest one. I am just going to inherit my money anyway. So I'm just going to spend it now, or I'm not going to spend it. She needs 10,000 worth of dental work, and I'm not going to spend the money on her dental work because I don't want that money to be taken away from my eventual inheritance. That is abuse. My mother always says, you'd know what I want. No, mom, I have no idea what you're going to want, and you won't talk to me about it either. I asked my mom to put down her thoughts as she thinks about them and put them in a drawer, which she's named the death drawer, which isn't about death, but it's about mental capacity, and she thinks it's funny. And all I say is, look, put whatever you want in there, just date it, because it's always the most recent wishes that matter. So I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to thank as well the Law Foundation of Ontario, which helped to fund the Power of Attorney 101, as well as the Factor Inwintosh Faculty of Social Work and our friends at Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario and WAL partners who helped to make that a reality. I'm going to wrap up now. I will turn it over to my colleagues. I will remain in the chat, and we're going to, again, share more information. So I'm going to turn it over to Detective Jennie Fitzsimmons to share more information. I'm going to be in the chat. Continue to ask me questions and I will answer them there. Over to you, Jennie.
I hope everyone can hear me. I'm sorry, I had to kind of change the view, so it might be a little darker here. I am Detective Constable Jennie Fitzsimmons. I work for the Peterborough Police. I have actually only been in my specific role, since 2018. My role right now has kind of expanded in the last couple of years. I started as a domestic violence coordinator for the Peterborough Police Service. So basically I review, and I get to that. I review all of the domestic violence reports. So if you would like to change a slide for me there, Raeann, I can't change it on my own. So I'm not sure how to flip through. Thank you. So I review all the domestic violence reports. I also investigate all the threshold capacity level domestic violence incidents that occur. So that includes like sexual assaults and that sort of thing. So that's a portion of my job, and it takes quite a bit of my job. The other side of my role is that for the most part, I do all of the elder abuse investigating cases in our service. Our frontline officers might take some of them and then they would pass them on to me. So like we're talking about frauds, we're talking about sexual assaults, we're talking about anything where somebody might be considered an elder. And so they deem that as an elder abuse incident. So failing to provide necessities of life, we do a lot of wellness checks, breaches of trust, that sort of thing. I also do all the long-term care homes and all the retirement homes. So any incidents that occur there, I deal with all of that. I provide presentations on frauds and scams, especially the ones that are specifically in the city of Peterborough. So I've done a number of those and gone out to a number of different places to provide information on that. And then the very small portion of my job that I also do is the vulnerable person checks, or registry. We in the city of Peterborough are very lucky that we have the option for our citizens to provide us with individuals that they consider, as long as they meet a certain number of criteria, that they consider to be vulnerable. And so we can add those people to our system, and it really helps if somebody goes missing or if we deal with them, just to give us some background on stuff. So if anybody lives in the city of Peterborough and they know somebody that they would consider to be vulnerable, please go onto our website and add them to our system, because it really does help us a lot. It also helps me when I get some investigations. We often get calls from the bank and that sort of thing, or different places where we're dealing with people and somebody asks, hey, do you know this person, or have you had any dealings with this person? So sometimes it's just nice to have some background on that individual, especially when we do get potential elder abuse or somebody calling in that they're concerned about a citizen, their neighbor or whatever. And we do have that information on file about them being vulnerable and possibly what their situation is, especially when family members don't live or their next of kin do not live in the city of Peterborough. It helps us a lot. Can you change it to the next slide for me? Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly talk. I'm not going to talk too much about what kind of cases we investigate or what we have on the go, because a lot of that wouldn't be able to be shared, just because some of it would be before the courts. But majority of our power of attorney cases that we do get, or that we get calls, or I get calls about people asking, we do find that majority of them do go civilly. There's a higher level of that you have to meet in order to proceed with something criminally. And generally, I find that when we are getting calls about the incidents that people have or concerns that they have, they just don't meet that criteria. So you can, with power of attorney cases, you can either proceed civilly or criminally. So just because you don't necessarily meet the criminal threshold, there is a potential that you still meet the civil threshold. So we do help people make sure they get their way through down, or if they have an issue, through the civil court system if we can't proceed criminally. So a lot of the times I do investigate if I do think there's something criminal there. And if there's just not enough grounds to proceed with a criminal charge, I will help people with the right venues in order to get to the civil part of it. And we do get a lot of questions about that. So thank you. So some of the issues that we commonly see, or that I'm commonly getting, is with power of attorney stuff, is when a person does not have a power of attorney in place before their capacity is diminished. So a lot of people will contact us and say, my mom's capacity is just not there, but I can't act on her behalf. And how do I deal with this? And what do I do? So they might be upset with, maybe the brother or the sister acting on their behalf. And then there's a lot of issues of people competing with that. So it is helpful to make sure, like Laura was saying, that you have these things in place before we get to that point, because when we get to that point, this is when our issues arise, and this is when things start to go the wrong way, and we end up having people who are victimized. Joint bank accounts are hugely an issue that we deal with, because once you have a joint bank account, that person has just as much rights to the bank or to the funds that are in that bank account as the other person. So we have a lot of issues of abuse that happen here that we can't really do anything about, because once somebody has a joint bank account, they both have equal rights to that account. So that for us makes huge issues. So if you're considering a power of attorney and you're thinking, what, let's just make it easier and I'll just make them a joint on my account, then this becomes a huge issue for us, because oftentimes it means we can't do anything. When a person's has not been deemed incompetent, but others are feeling that they're making inappropriate choices or out of character choices, this happens a lot. So as people age, there's generally somebody who kind of comes in and is the new best friend per se, or the one child who starts helping out a lot, and all of a sudden, mom or dad or the aunt or uncle are making decisions that they wouldn't have necessarily made before. But the mom or dad are saying, no, I'm happy with this decision. This is a decision I want to make. So we do get a lot of calls about that, where people are just concerned that their loved one's making an inappropriate choice, but they're not deemed incompetent yet. We also get a lot of calls about people making adequate decisions, and spending the finances kind of like properly, but not necessarily a substantial discrepancy. But people are still concerned that that decision probably wasn't the one that their family member would have made. The couple that I can think of right off the top of my head are like one home versus the other. There's not a substantial difference in the homes, what they're providing, or really the cost, but there might be slight differences. And another issue would be like people who move into the house to take care of their loved one. Now all of a sudden they're doing like a few things to the house to kind of like increase its standard of living, but not substantially enough to say that that person's really misusing the money. So we do get a lot of those. They do have to obviously provide like the receipts and stuff for what they're spending the money on, but it's hard when there's just not quite a large enough discrepancy to say that person's really using the money inaccurately from what the person would like. Can you change the slide for me, Raeann? Sorry. Thank you. So these are the types of charges that we lay. So I said majority of our cases do go civilly and they don't actually proceed criminally, just because there isn't enough grounds. But when we do lay grounds, the ones that I am seeing the most of are frauds, theft, and forgery. So frauds, unfortunately, we're dealing with this right now with a woman who just signed off on a mortgage for her house. She had no idea she signed a mortgage off. She just thought she needed some work done, and this is what they were telling her: to get this work done, you need to sign this paperwork. She didn't realize that meant she was remortgaging her entire home. So that is the type of stuff that we are seeing, and it is with power of attorneys that are happening, people who they have entrusted to help them out. Theft, we're also seeing happen as well, and that's where people are basically taking the money from their bank account, right? So they're using it towards their own personal health and well-being, like really increasing the look of this house. All of a sudden, they're changing the master bedroom bathroom to a jacuzzi tub because that's what they want, not what the loved one really wants. Forgery, when they're signing things on behalf of this person, like with that person's signature, not with their signature. This also happens quite a bit, and it's to sign off on things that the person didn't necessarily agree with before they were incompetent. So those are kind of the ones that we're dealing with the most. I'm sure other services are seeing different things than we are, but in Peterborough, that's what we're mostly seeing, or mostly the charges we are laying in terms of the power of attorney cases. Obviously, when it comes to elder abuse cases, we lay charges in all sorts of categories, and I've almost seen everyone. But when it comes to power of attorney, those are kind of the ones we're dealing with right now. Unfortunately, with power of attorney, they don't get reported enough. That's the problem. So if you know someone, if you've seen something, if there's something that concerns you, majority of the time where we're learning about it is through the banks, or if there's multiple family members who are involved who are seeing it. But really outside of that, a lot of individuals are being victimized and we're never hearing about it because those individuals only rely on that power of attorney. So you never learn. But if you know someone, or if you see something, or if you work with somebody that you find concerned, or they're saying something to you, it's always good. We can always do a check on the well-being. We can always go and have a chat with them and just find out kind of where things are and kind of try and investigate as best we can. I know we've also done ones where we've just gone and checked on the well-being of a mother living with her son potentially taking advantage of her. We try to get them the supports in place, even if there's not a criminal charge we need to lay. We're lucky here in Peterborough. We have lots and lots of supports systems in place, so I can always contact people to help out or get involved that can best meet those people's needs. So if you live in the city of Peterborough, because I know there's people from everywhere, you can always call the Peterborough Police Service if you need any help or have any questions. You can always contact me. I am the only person in the department, so you will speak directly to me. You can also contact the Anti-Fraud Center. They are also very helpful for certain situations and issues that may arise. And that's pretty much, I think, all I have to say. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
That's great. Thanks, Jenny. Raeann, is there anything additionally that you'd like to add in terms of your experience with Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously Laura's done a really good overview of the situations around elder abuse. We also get similar calls that Jenny has been describing. And our role here at Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is we provide that information referral, and we often will call Jenny and say, hey, we have this situation. But we also support agencies and organizations where they may have concerns, just to give them some information or some general advice. But we don't do case management, unfortunately, but we do have connections within different police services. So I know there's people from different parts of Ontario, and many of the local police services now have designated positions similar to Jenny's across Ontario, which is remarkable. When I started working in this field, we didn't even have, police forces didn't see this on the radar. They might have been dealing with senior issues, but didn't really prioritize the need to actually fund positions. So we're now at the point where police services are expanding their departments to have 3 or 4 people working within the seniors division. So we've made leaps and bounds since the work when I started this work. So yeah, the one thing I was thinking about, a couple questions that haven't come up, and I know that Laura's been great answering some of them on chat as we've been having these conversations, is Laura, I just wonder maybe we could talk about with COVID and the changes that happened in legislation, and I'm not sure if they're still in place, around doing a power of attorney virtually, if that's still in place or if that's been lifted.
No, it's still in place. So, we spent a long time saying we always have to do things like powers of attorney, and for that matter, wills in person, et cetera, et cetera. We were very, very strict about that as lawyers. Then COVID came, and boy, did we ever need to have powers of attorney available, because people became unwell very quickly. And for that matter, very sadly, wills became ever more important as well. So the Law Society of Ontario did make some changes to allow instructions to be taken in some cases online. If there was questions about a person's capacity, there was a different set of processes, and it was certainly recommended, and in some cases required, that they be meeting in person. But otherwise, there are that. Whether that will continue on to be an ongoing service, I don't know. I think it probably would be great to have it. I mean, this is an area that people really need to be able to have more access. And I think that sometimes you make things overly complicated. What people need is some advice. They need some help. They need some opportunity to think things through, to really understand that. And I think we've become a Zoom world for many people. In other cases, I think an in-person decision and conversation is really important. One of the challenges with the Zoom or video is being really fairly uncertain if somebody else is listening. So I could have someone on the other side of my computer that you can't see. I like headsets because then I know that nobody else can hear me, but certainly things that I say could be heard by another person. So in some uncomfortable circumstances, that's not so great. Where if I'm taking instructions individually, I can close the door and I know that I'm talking to that person alone. So I'm not sure which way it's going to go. I think that there's probably going to be a hybrid process.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I was thinking in terms of like undue influence. There's somebody behind them saying, say this, do this, or, just, putting the computer, do like a 360, make sure there's nobody else around. So you do have that privacy, and it is between you and your lawyer. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And again, it's that piece, and Peter asked it as well, do you have to have a lawyer? No, you don't have to. Not for will. Not for power of attorney. Are those will kits in drugstores any good? No, they're really not. Don't use those. But there are some online services now that have basic stuff that is not bad. I'm not your lawyer and I'm not giving you legal advice, but if you can find a little bit of money to have somebody, often they'll be what we call loss leaders, like they'll do a bundle, $300, $400. Ask around. Solo lawyers often cost less than people with big fancy overheads. Sometimes rural communities will cost less. But we know that a little bit of money up front can save you, tens of thousands of dollars on the back end, and it's worth it. And people always think, maybe I'll go to the lawyer for my will, but I'll just crank off that power of attorney myself. I'll just print it off and whatever. Yeah. But if all the money is gone by the time you die, the will's not going to be very helpful, right? What we're seeing is a real trend in Raeann. You and I have talked a lot about this before, where that abuse of power of attorney is because you get your hands on the stuff before before the person dies. So we used to wait till people died before we fight over the money. Now, not so much. So
Right.
we really see that opportunity there. So it's helpful to be able to get that advice if you can. If not, watch all these kinds of videos, and there's great resources in Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario's websites about this, some real in-depth stuff, and ours as well at CanAge.ca. We've got some good resources too.
Great.
That's great. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time today. It's just been a fantastic session. I'm going to watch it again, even though I didn't tune out for 1 minute. It was very informative. And Jenny, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us as well and give the local Peterborough perspective. And Raeann, as always, thank you for the Ontario perspective. And Laura's posting the information I was just going to mention, so that's great. Check out those websites, and I understand there's some learning opportunities coming up, and people can take advantage of those as well. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl, Jenny, and Laura and Catherine for participating in today's session. And just so everybody knows, the webinar will be posted on our website tomorrow. And this is our new website. We have a new brand, new look. So check us out. We have some new resources. Check under fact sheets. There are some fact sheets and information under financial abuse that we've added to our resources. So yeah, so the PowerPoint deck will also have everyone's contact information as well. And I know Laura's posted that in the chat box. So again, just to remind you, you'll get a quick valuation. If you don't mind spending 1 minute, take a quick 7 questions and answer those. And thank you so much, and enjoy your day. And thank you again.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful one. Please, you've got to email, join the CanAge.ca, because otherwise we can't email you. And it's free, and everyone's welcome to do it. Okay, take care, everyone.